Hello, welcome to Short Bites, a Stephen King podcast. I'm your host, Jason White, and with me today is my friend and fellow writer, Daniel Braum. Today, we are going to discuss what Daniel writes, his Stephen King origin stories, and we'll also be discussing Stephen King's short story, The Mangler. Welcome to the show, Daniel. How are you?
Doing good. So thanks for having me on the show. What an exciting and fun show to talk about the great Stephen King and his many amazing short stories.
Yes, I, uh, I I think we were talking just before I hit record, and I'm like, this is quite ambitious, and the weight of that really kind of hit because we're still at the beginning here. but but there is a mission. There is a mission, and that's to have fun. Everything I do, including writing and podcasting, it's all meant to be fun, and it is. But also with this podcast, I want to educate myself using the master's prose to
What
see
a
what I can
what a
learn from it.
joy. What
Yeah,
what a fun and educational, what a fun way to learn, right? Like how
yeah.
amazing is that?
So I want to thank you for coming on and talking some Stephen King with me. But first, I want to talk about you. The audience for this podcast is probably different than the audience for the Weird Reads podcast. So people who don't know who you are, can you tell us about yourself and what it is that you like to write?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me on. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and to talk about the great Stephen King. Um, about me, my name is Daniel Braum. I'm a writer of short stories. I first started being published in Cemetery Dance Publications, which is anyone who's a fan of Stephen King. Um, I first started being published in Cemetery Dance magazine about 20 years ago, and Cemetery Dance publishes my short story collection, The Night Marchers and Other Strange Tales, which is a good introduction to. It's my first short story collection, and it's an introduction to the kind of fiction I write. I write quiet horror. It is the kind of stuff you would find in like the old Outer Limits or Twilight Zone, and I call the work Strange Tales in homage to British author Robert Aikman, because authors like him and Shirley Jackson is the kind of stuff I like to read and like to write. The stuff where there's a balance and an intentional ambiguity between is it psychological or is it supernatural?
Yes, that's what I love about your work. I mean, this is the second time we're talking today. We just finished doing an episode for Weird Reads, and I was saying that you're one of my favorite writers, and I hold you like near Stephen King because your prose is like beautiful. Like Stephen King's prose can be beautiful, and Stephen, like, just as an aside here, Stephen King gets a lot of flack for being way too mainstream or whatever. But people who say that, I don't think really look at the prose of Stephen King.
Oops, did I do that? We
Because
can cut that
no, we'll keep
out.
that. The Stephen King's prose is absolutely beautiful. It's not mainstream. I wouldn't say it is anyway. But
His
getting
prose
back,
is so it's so beautiful in its economy, and it's always just right for the moment. He has so many different styles of prose, and
yeah,
it just feels invisible. You know, the worst thing you can say about prose perhaps is, yeah, like to become aware of it. Like King's prose is the most beautiful kind of prose because it's just invisible. I'm in a story and I'm not thinking about the act of writing, and there's no higher compliment I think a reader can give a writer.
absolutely, yeah. Now, your most recent release is Creatures of Liminal Space. Can you tell us about that collection? Oh, there it is. Yeah, and the cover, and talk about the cover artist as well.
Yeah, I'll just a quick mention because I'm just chomping at the bit to talk about Stephen King. But yeah, surf on over to Jason's Weird Reads if you haven't. We just recorded a conversation. It should be out at some point where we go in depth talking about Creatures of Liminal Space. But if you're just going to hang out here, Creatures of Liminal Space is a short story collection. It's 3 short stories that are illustrated by Dan Sauer of Jackanapes Press. Jackanapes Press is the small press that put out that book. And it is 3 strange tales, 3 Twilight Zone like of the longer short stories. And it's interspersed with a dozen pieces of flash fiction, a dozen literal short bites of flash fiction, all with the theme of either a cryptid or some sort of interstitial space in between a place. And with a lot of tension between the psychological aspects, the human conditions, and perhaps the strange or supernatural.
Yeah. Aside from creatures of liminal space, because I think that would be a good starting point. But let's pretend for a second that that doesn't exist. Which book of yours would you recommend people read first?
Yeah, check out the Night Marchers and Other Strange Tales from Cemetery Dance.
Which is great.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, that's a great starting point. It's my first collection, and you could find it wherever you find books.
Uh, like Stephen King, you write a lot of short stories. I was wondering, what is it about the short story that pulls you to write them?
Wow, I just like I guess I'm an author like Stephen King, but it just feels so weird to say like Stephen King. It just as King, yeah, because he's such an amazing and prolific novelist. I just love I love the I love the art form of the short story, and yeah, I grew up reading King, so while I don't have a real specific thing to say about that, King was definitely formative in that before I knew a lot about short stories as a writer, I was just a reader. I just knew that, hey, things like Night Shift and things like Skeleton Crew, that was just what was doing it for me. That was just I was a rebellious teenager, but that was the kind of shit I like to read. I was like, I even had an English
Mhm.
teacher who was into it too. My mom brought me home a Stephen King paperback, so I was fortunate enough to like be around people who loved reading the short story form and to just have cool short stories at hand. And like probably every other horror writer says it, yeah, that did something to me. That did something for me. It's cool now to be on this show because I was worried about deconstructing it. Like now I'm like, wow, what makes it tick? Am I worthy to even say what makes it tick? But to hear your introduction to the purpose and the mission to learn how to become better writers from the master Stephen King, I feel like my preparation or my analysis was, yeah, it'll be a fun and maybe even a useful thing to do to try to learn from the Stephen King short story.
The master.
The master, master.
Yeah.
That's
All right. So master. Yeah. Uh, so okay. This is the first episode where I've renamed this section. I just used to call it the Stephen King origin stories, but now I am calling it the Stephen King Grill, as though this were like some sort of restaurant. So
all right.
first question here for that is, what is you kind of mentioned it there when you were talking about your mom bringing you home a collection of Stephen King short stories. So is that your Stephen King origin story? And is there more to it?
What's the question? What's the question? What's
What's
my
your
first?
what's
Oh,
your Stephen King origin story?
oh yeah. I think maybe my first one was my mom. I think one summer, I think she brought me home the Stand from the supermarket checkout. I think she was like, "My son's weird. He likes to read. This is a fat book. I'll bring it home for my son." And I was just like, "Thank you, mom." So I think one summer, I think The Stand was my first Stephen King to be totally factual. So yeah.
The funny thing with me is I used to bring books like that, like The Stand and whatnot, to high school with me, and I used to get made fun of for it. Not bullied, but just people ribbing each other. They would, if I didn't have a book that was like 400 pages or longer, my friends would be like, "Where's your doorstopper?" Like,
What doofuses. I have another Stephen King origin story. Was I did read Night Shift and Skeleton Crew. I was lucky enough that I was definitely an outcast and that kind of thing. But I was lucky enough that I had a group of losers that we were, no pun
yeah.
intended, that we were a group together and we would read and we'd just slowly nerd out on reading them. And someone spoiled one of the stories.
Oh
I think they
no.
spoiled the Boogeyman, and you know what? I'm still scarred by that today.
Yeah, I understand that.
I'm not sure if I've fully forgiven him.
Yeah, I understand that. I had somebody spoil a Agatha Christie book that we were reading for class once on me, and it was like, once you know the spoil, like the who done it. the rest of the book just wasn't interesting anymore.
It's a sin. It's a sin.
It's
Spoil.
just like and
Don't do it.
they did it maliciously too, I forget, but I just remember them looking at me, and they had this angry look on their face, and they're like,
Mm.
"Well, you know who, did it in the book?" I'm like, "Don't tell me, I don't wanna know," and then they told me, and I was like,
Some people just want to see the world burn. I don't know if my friend was malicious. I think he was just dopey and not realizing the
"Dang."
power, the power to hurt me that echoed through generations. I'm still in pain.
The power. Alright, so, what would you say is your favorite King novel?
Wow, my favorite King novel. I was about to go show and tell and show you my favorite short story. My favorite
Oh,
King
we'll get there
novel.
soon.
My favorite King novel. My favorite King novel. Um, wow. Okay, so it's got to be Wizard and Glass,
Oh, yeah.
book four of the Dark Tower. Man, there's a lot of neck and neck second places, but man, if I have to pick just one, that's the one.
That's a really cool choice. Are you a Tower fan?
Big time. Love it unconditionally. Love it so much.
Awesome. So am I. I tried reading it 2 or 3 times, and last year I finally finished it, and I'm so glad I did.
Mm,
Um,
what a
would you
joy! What a treat that book is, huh?
yeah, that book is
I mean that series, that
but that book
journey.
too, Wizard and Glass, is, like, fantastic, but without getting into spoilers, I'm curious, what did you think of the end of the journey?
I loved it so much. I
Me
feel
too.
like I feel like it was just it was so right. It was just
Yeah.
without any spoilers for it. It's very unique. It felt very satisfying, and it provided both a sense of closure and a sense of openness that I felt like it required. And I really look. It's a very divisive ending for me. It was chillingly perfect. I loved it.
I loved it too, like, it's one of my favorite series now because of that ending,
Yeah,
but I loved the whole thing too, but that
yeah,
ending was just like, "Oh my god," like, it blew my I didn't see the very ending, the very, very ending coming at all, but when it happened, I was just like, "Oh my god, this is beautiful," like, it
yeah. I really felt like I went on that journey. Like I wasn't around in '69 or whenever '70 when the first when the you know the first the Dark Man fled across the desert and the Gunslinger followed came in fantasy and science fiction. But I did read it. I did read the Gunslinger very early on, and I definitely read those books on opening day, like when they came out. I definitely was
yeah.
waiting for
Oh,
them, and I felt very invested and a real sense of time with me with those books. So yeah, it was really a great experience reading those books for me.
so you really felt the pain of those long waits.
Oh yeah. I felt those pain, and when he was in the hospital, I was just like, "Please don't die," you know, just like don't die because you're a human and we don't, but don't die without, like, God damn it, like that would have just been one of the ultimate. I mean, it would just would have been a huge loss, but selfishly, as a fan of just the art, it would have been like one of the great, painful, unfinished masterpieces of history. Should have if that had happened.
Absolutely, and I think he realized that because that's when he knocked off the last 3 right after like, a few years after, right?
So I'm told. Yeah, I think there's I don't know if it's yeah. It's a lot of lore about that time or folklore. I'm not sure how much of it is real, how much of it, yeah, about who knew or who he told or may not have told about them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, alright, so, what would you say is your least favorite Stephen King novel? Or do you even have one?
yeah, I don't know. I don't think about it. Like because I haven't had a bad experience reading them. I dropped off and like I stopped. I used to have to read every one, but I'm not there. So yeah, I'm just gonna have to pass on that. Like I can't.
That's totally fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I have a would you rather question here. Would you rather read only King novels or his shorter works for the rest of your life?
Gonna go with novels only because it's so. I feel like I've read the shorts, and as wonderful as they are, if I'm going for the rest of the life, I'm gonna need hope to live long and prosper. And there's a lot of he's got a lot of work there, a lot of work that I haven't read. So let's go with novels.
Yeah, you know, I when I first started this podcast, I said the short stories because there's so many more of them, but I'm regretting saying that now because a lot of people have convinced me that I think the novels are it's not that they're better, it's just that they're more in depth. They have, the deeper characterizations and whatnot. His novels are where you fall in love with those characters, right? And the short stories are usually sort of like punchlines and whatnot. Or you do get the characters though, because you get the longer short stories, but still, I'm still on the fence. Like maybe I should move over to the novel team, or I don't know.
Or you could be in a quantum state of both.
Yeah, yeah, there's that too. All right, now here we go. Here's the question you've been waiting for. Do you have a favorite short story by Stephen King?
I do. I came prepared with show and tell.
Nice.
The Raft.
Oh,
The
nice.
Raft, and this is a copy of Twilight Zone magazine, June 1983, the first publication of it. I was not around reading. I may have been predated my King reading or just around that time, so I didn't read it in the original Twilight Zone. I didn't know that magazine was out there, but I do like to collect the original appearances of my favorite short stories. And I, if I had to pick one, I do pick The Raft as my favorite.
That's awesome. How did you get that magazine? Did you get it like when it came out, or did you happen to just?
No, no, no. I didn't even know. I didn't even know the Twilight Zone had a magazine until I started tracking down my favorite short stories. And I was tracking down Because Their Skins Are Finer, which is my favorite Tanith Lee short story. And it was out in a magazine called Twilight Zone. I'm like, what? There's a
What?
magazine called Twilight Zone? So I started collecting them. I actually finally
Nice.
put together a full set of them. So I now finally actually have a full set of Twilight Zone magazines. And you'd be surprised how many of our favorite short stories first
Are in there.
appeared in those pages. King appeared in those pages for the first time. I mean, some of the first of his short stories, and a ton of all the classic 80s authors and 70s authors. It's
That
great.
that is incredible.
Yeah.
Are those magazines expensive to track down and buy?
Um, you can get, yeah, look on eBay. If you're buying a single issue, it might be a little pricey, but you could usually just kind of find like a lot or something like that. But
Nice.
if not, they could be like 10 or 20 bucks, which can be expensive unless you just kind of like find a reading copy here and there.
Do you read through them when you get them, or do you just keep them in the package?
Oh, hell yeah. Oh, I read them. They're meant to be
Yeah,
read.
I
I
would
mean,
have
this
to
one,
too, right?
yeah, I mean, this one, or sometimes, like, yeah, like the King ones are special. I do collect them, but yeah, I read them. I read them to death. I read every line of it. It's so much fun because I didn't know it. I didn't know it existed or had the money back then. And it's now acts as it's such a time capsule too. It has our favorite films, letters, illustrations, just what was going on in pop culture of horror and fantastic fiction. So much fun.
You may have just given me a new hobby.
A new obsession. All right,
New
I'll start
obsession.
you off. I'll send my next care package. I know what going to Canada. I know what's going to be in it there. So
Oh, all right. One thing I love about your writing is that you don't just stick to like horror or you know scary things. Uh, Especially your collection, the last big collection you did. The name of
Underworld Dreams. Is that
Underworld
Underworld?
Dreams. Yeah,
Okay.
you skip around genres, and I find that fascinating. But Stephen King does that too. So I was wondering, have you ever like because Stephen King writes in such a broad like he's known for writing horror, but he doesn't just write horror. He writes a lot of different genres. Have has Stephen King ever failed, or has he failed to write in a story, short story or otherwise, in a preferred genre or trope that you enjoy? And if he has, what would you like to see King write?
No, he hasn't failed, but I think it's great to mention it this way because I guess because he's so effortless at it, I don't think of King as being an interstitial writer, but he totally is. But he King is actually the poster child for showing horror as a modality, of showing how horror naturally and organically fits within or is the glue that can tie together the other ones. So while King is right, he has a lot of things that are science fiction, the Jaunt or the Tommyknockers or any other number of them, but it's still horror. There's still science fiction trappings of it, but the horror is such an organic part of it because it's like the focus he puts on it. Also with the Dark Tower is immensely interstitial. It has all the trappings of it's literally interstitial, and it hits on the tropes that we often think of are the other genres, but the glue that holds it all together, I think, is the darkness and the tone, and it makes King the poster child for it. There was a time, and I'm not sure if it was the 90s or the early zeros or whatever it was. I remember when King, and maybe it's died down a bit, but I remember King really wanted to be writing lit stories, or maybe it was just my perception, or I felt like there was a perception that he wanted to be accepted by the lit community, and like half of the community, I don't even know what these communities are, but sometimes it feels like the lit community looks down its nose at horror, or even look down its nose at King. And there was a while there where I think King was trying to write more lit focused stories. And I don't know if this is it's an off point to your question, but I feel like King's classic stories, The Night Shift, the Skeleton Crew, I feel like by nature they are lit stories, even though they're horror. I feel like he wasn't even thinking about it, he wasn't even trying, because so much time has passed. His depictions of life and ordinary folk, the King character, I feel like that's more lit than any other stuff. It's lit without even trying to be lit. You're so money, you don't even know how money you are, Stephen King, on that front there. So I don't know. That was sort of a non sequitur, but maybe it was on point.
No, I totally agree with that. Honestly, he's absolutely a lit writer. Um, he writes he's character driven stories, and his prose, you could even say, goes into the beautiful, and it's not simple like some people seem to think it is. It's way more complex, especially his short stories. Like when I'm digging into these short stories here, uh, sometimes I'm feeling a little intimidated because the writing can be quite layered.
Yeah, and simple isn't a dirty word. Like, I think, I'm not sure
No,
if you're.
not at all.
Yeah, it's not a
Absolutely
dirty
not.
word, but I see what you're saying. He can write more. He can write different modalities of prose.
Yeah,
And
like
that's no small task.
my prose is absolutely simple, so I'm not making fun of simple, simple prose. But when you're just digging into Stephen King, it's really layered. It's like peeling back an onion. Often, the more bigger the story, the bigger the onion, and there's nothing easy about his prose at all. Maybe some are a little more straightforward, but there's not too many of those, I don't think.
Yeah, I think the Mangler, the prose is really transparent, and he gets out of the way the prose to let the story come through. And I did notice in the Mangler there were like one or two lines that were really atmospheric and evocative, and I was just like, oh yeah, like you knew what you were doing. He like
Mhm.
really it was really getting to the educational part of it, of trying to pick apart what was making something we liked tick.
Absolutely.
Because when I was a kid, I was just like, the Mangler fucking rocks.
Yeah,
You're
but it
just like,
does that too, yeah.
what a fucking awesome story. And now I'm looking at the Mangler, I'm like, why does the Mangler rock? How does the Mangler rock? It's
Yeah,
just two different points in time of enjoying it.
yeah, absolutely. All right, so if you're ready, I think I'm ready. We can move into the Mangler.
Let's go to the Blue Ribbon Laundromat.
Absolutely, yes. So, before we continue, I just want to warn the listener that we will spoil this story. So, heads up, unless you don't mind the Mangler getting spoiled for you. But I suggest that you go read and then come back. So, the Mangler. The Mangler was first published in Cavalier magazine, which a lot of his stories were. If you don't know what that is, it's a booby magazine. And you know what? The Booby Room is mentioned in this story a couple of times, as in being like a lunatic asylum. I don't know how they got those two things crossed, but okay. Anyways, it was also collected in Night Shift, which we're reading through here with this podcast, which was published in 1978, and it's Stephen King's first short story collection. So the plot here, quick recap for listeners who have read the story. This is set in a laundry facility. The story follows police officer John Hunton, who's investigating a series of violent deaths linked to a massive piece of machinery dubbed the Mangler. The machine appears to be possessed following a bizarre series of events involving a virgin's blood, herbs, and there's also some other ingredients like bat blood and stuff like that. With the help of his friend Mark Jackson, who's an occult expert, Hunton attempts to exorcise the machine, but the exorcism fails and the Mangler breaks free from its moorings and escapes. So this story, as you said, it is just absolutely fucking awesome. It's like kind of like an adrenaline rush when you read it. It's just like it comes across as kind of silly if you think about it without reading it, but when you read it, King is able to make you suspend your disbelief about a possessed piece of machinery that is literally stomping people and folding them.
And that's an understatement, because you don't even. At least you're talking about it as if you had a choice. I never thought the Mangler was silly. I never even knew what the word suspension of disbelief is. Like, the Mangler just you're there and you're scared. I never for once questioned. I didn't have time. It's such a muscular, masterful story that I never even questioned it. It was just illuminating. Be like, oh,
absolutely, yeah.
I never knew to be afraid of haunted objects, but thanks, King. Now I have something else to be afraid of.
It's like anything that's potentially dangerous in the first place, Stephen King can make even worse by possessing it. And he does it very well in this. I want to mention too that Stephen King, while in college, he worked in a similar industrial laundry facility, and so it's interesting that he does this because it's almost as though he hated that type of work. He did this in the graveyard shift, that story too, and he worked, I think, in a similar facility as that. But that one, there's a lot more hatred towards the owners. This one, the owners are more sort of just in the background, and all the machinery checks out to have been supposedly safe. And I looked up the machine that this takes place in because, while you're reading it, you're like, is this real? Is this machine real?
The
So
Hadley Watson Model 6 speed
yeah.
ironer and folder.
Yep, I looked it up, and the only thing I could find were pictures of the movie adaptation, so it doesn't actually exist.
Oh dear
But
God!
but there are machines that do somewhat similar to what this one is written about. Now, do you remember your first impression of this machine? Like when you other than just it being fun, like it's terrifying what it does to people, or what it
Yeah.
wants to do to people.
Yeah. I mean, this whole story is a story about, for such a muscular, bloody story. I think King is working a lot with anticipation and anxiety. Like, a part of it is, we get to see the graphic of what it does to people, but there's also like, it's that fear of like, don't put your hand near that.
Yeah.
Like, there's a fear of like, even if this machine isn't a possessed thing, it's like, that's a dangerous machine. Don't touch it. So yeah,
Like, don't touch the fireplace.
exactly. That's the sort of thing. Like, if you were there at your parents, they'd be like, don't touch it. Hands at your side. Don't touch it.
We
Next
told
to
you
me.
not to touch it.
Yeah, I told you. You walk next to me. Get hurt here. It's a dangerous place. Right. Because as you said, even though there's safety bars, even though the stakes are high, the potential for danger, the potential for maiming and mangling, no pun intended, is very real and very palpable in this story.
Yeah. And so I wanted to talk a little bit. I'm going to read an excerpt in a second here. Um, when the story begins, as I mentioned in the synopsis, it starts off with John Hunton, who's investigating a workplace casualty. The death is Mrs. Frawley, and she's been stamped to death, and then her flattened corpse is folded like clothing. Now, as I said, when I read this, I wanted to mention this too. Like when I read this the first time, like all those years ago, I didn't think about it being silly or stupid. That's my adult brain, and not while I'm reading it. This is afterwards when you're reflecting on it. I'm like, that could never happen. Like a person, and then you picture what that might look like in a movie. But while you're reading it, like this is like terrifying stuff. It works. Um, but I love the ironing press itself. It's 800 pounds of pressure for a shirt. It seems like a little bit much, right?
Steam heat, 800 pounds per square inch.
And the steam is
Yeah.
like 300 degrees, which I guess
Yeah.
speaks to steam, right? But the pounds of pressure, wow. Like that would crush somebody flat.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, it's just frightening. Yeah, just yeah, he definitely convinces us that the real world danger of this machine is you're going to get hurt if your hand gets caught in it, and you just yeah.
Absolutely. And there's some pretty nasty little consequences here. So I'm going to read from page 118 of the paperback here. My copy is full of tabs, and it's also starting to fall apart. They don't make books like they used to. All right, so this is a reflection on what our protagonist, the cop, saw while he was at the laundry. Hunton closed his eyes, and in the darkness he could see the Hadley Watson speed ironer again, as it had been that afternoon. It formed a long rectangular box in shape, 30 feet by 6. At the feeder end, a moving canvas belt moved under the safety bar, up at a slight angle and then down. The belt carried the damp dried wrinkle sheets in a continuous cycle over and under 16 huge revolving cylinders that made up the main body of the machine. Over 8 and under 8, pressed between them like thin ham between layers of superheated bread. Steam heat in the cylinders could be adjusted up to 300 degrees for maximum drying. The pressure on the sheets that rode the moving canvas belt was set at 800 pounds per square foot to get out every wrinkle, and Mrs. Frawley, somehow, had been caught and dragged in. The steel, asbestos jacketed pressing cylinders had been as red as barn paint, and the rising steam from the machine had carried the sickening stench of hot blood. Bits of her white blouse and blue slacks, even uh, sorry, let me start that again. Bits of her white blouse and blue slacks, even ripped segments of her bra and panties, had been torn free and ejected from the machine's far end 30 feet down, the bigger sections of cloth folded with grotesque and blood-stained neatness by the automatic folder. But not even that was the worst. It tried to fold everything, he said to Jackson, tasting bile in his throat. But a person isn't a sheet, Mark. What I saw, what was left of her, like Stanner, the hapless foreman, he could not finish. They took her out in a basket, he said softly. That writing there, though, he goes into exactly what this machine is made of and how it works. And then he takes Mrs. Frawley and you go on another journey through that machine, but instead of the clothing, it's her body that's flattened, and then her clothes are torn off and they're folded, and then her body itself is flattened and folded.
I think King might be, if we're using a musical metaphor, the Beatles and the Stones. I think King might like to think of himself. I'm not sure how much he likes or dislikes the Beatles. I think he likes the Stones, but it just dawned on me that Night Shift, or even the Mangler itself, is such a cut. It's such a white album, and what I mean by that is King. The stories look effortless, and they're enjoyable on their face, but the Mangler is such an influential and prototype. Just as on the White Album, the White Album was like the beginning of metal, the beginning of psychedelia, the beginning of so many different kinds of things. The Mangler is deceptively simple because it's just such a muscular, kick-ass body horror, like you just read, splatter. But there's so much more operating in terms of technique and kinds of stories than just the splatter. I know you're focusing on that splatter right there, but there's what I call a what if story happening.
Hmm.
There's the body horror splatter happening. There's a detective police procedural happening, and there's like a supernatural mystery happening
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. I like the splatter aspect because, well, that's a weak. I don't know if I'd call it a weakness, but it's something I enjoy. I'm not afraid of the gory stuff, but King can really flourish when he goes into the gory stuff, and that I think is a great example of what he's pulling from in the horror of it, and there's also like human element to that too. Um,
Yeah, it does raise the stakes about, and it interplays with the other ones because the what I call the what if is like,
yeah,
what if objects could be possessed?
absolutely.
What if the Mangler got loose?
Yeah.
These are two very simple things. What if, because you're not sure in the beginning of the story, it's sort of, you're not sure that it's possessed. It's like, they he kind of like lulls you down the path, like, hey, there's nothing wrong with it. It was just an accident. But then it escalates, and more the facts come that maybe something's happening here. And then once once the character realizes that, oh my God, this thing really is possessed, the point of the story changes to, okay, as long as it just doesn't break free, you know.
Mhm.
So it's like, and the stakes of that are, it's like, wow, it's so dangerous if it's bolted down. What's going to happen if this thing is free and running around? And
Yeah.
of, and of course, the structure of the story is why I yeah. Well, we can get to the ending later. I think you have a question on that later on.
Yeah, I would just wanted to mention too that the story is similar to the short story, which comes just like two or three short stories before this one, Graveyard Shift. Um, how much do you think this might be? Because that one was definitely a commentary on unsafe workplaces. Uh, do you think that this one is also a commentary on workplace dangers as well?
While I think it could be, and I think it's fair to make that comment, that never felt like it was for this reader. Not
Mhm.
back in the day when I was reading it, and I even revisited that notion when I was re-preparing for it. I did look in that way, and I didn't see it as that.
That's good because, I was kinda leaning towards that myself, but then when I really thought about it, I was like, "No," because this one doesn't, like, go into, the politics of bad management and not really care because I think the owners in this one do actually care about, their workers, like, this isn't something that happened because of their neglect, although it is mentioned in the
Yeah,
beginning
yeah.
of the story that there's bad lighting and stuff like that. But it's not really about bad management.
No, although there is some inclination that the owner may very remotely have something to do with the supernatural, and that the girl who gets injured, at first it seems like a red herring, a Sherry Oulette who cuts her hand, and
Yeah,
then we kind of realize how it's almost, there's the accidental supernatural that you think is accidental because they're like, oh, but there's no components, but then King shows you how those components could have, accidentally been there. And then the fact that she's the owner's niece, it kind of raises like, oh, was the owner trying to do this? But that's just, aside. Yeah, I didn't. It did not feel like it was a commentary on work, working class, or
yeah.
workplace.
I'm glad you brought up, Sherry. Owlette too, because it's her. She gets cut by the machine, and this is before the machine goes totally evil. She cuts herself. I forget what, where, and how she cuts herself, but the blood gets on the machine, and it's
She cut
propo-
herself on the clamp, and it's Mrs. Jill. When Mrs. Jillian's in the hospital, they're investigating it, and Hutton is asking Mrs. Jillian, and Mrs. Jillian kind of. That's why it kind of feels like it sneaks up on you. He tells, like, he's asking, "Hey, did anything else happen?" Nothing happened, except once Sherry accidentally cut her hand. That's when it first started acting strange. And
yeah,
then Hutton is talking about it with Jackson, and Jackson's saying, like, well, there is some history of the supernatural where possession can be, but it would need all these elements. And he'd be like, it would never happen.
yeah,
But then you're like, you talk about gel, like horse hoof. You're like, oh, but there's jello. And talk about bats, and like, oh, there is bats there. And it just shows how all the ingredients for possession
yeah, and
accidentally were
her
present. And yeah,
her
a
blood
virgin
needed to
blood.
be a
Yeah,
virgin blood, yeah, which,
right.
they find out later because they go investigating once more accidents happen, so they go in
Yeah, they
and
ask her straight up. They just
yeah,
ask her
and
straight up.
it's a it's a funny part too, because they don't wanna ask her that because it's a
Yeah.
very personal question, right? But they have to. So they're like, "Okay, we're just gonna come out with this question, and we know it's awkward, but, bear with us. It might be very important to the investigation. Are you a virgin?"
And while it isn't, I didn't think it was a class, a working class commentary. I feel like, God, it's not an original thought to say, but it's the working class presentation of all the people that lends the verisimilitude to the story.
Mhm,
And I think you touched just on that, the fact of that interaction, that these characters had to do that, and um, that led you to just believe in the world of the story.
mhm, yeah. I have another excerpt about her, I think this is yeah, about her virgin blood and whatnot. Um, where's the beginning here? I don't know where I'm supposed to start. Here, let me write something down quickly. 4152. Okay, I'm just gonna start here. Uh, the steam line breaking, that awful, awful accident with Mrs. Frawley, God rest her. Little things like that. Like the day Essie got her dress caught in one of those drive chains. That could have been dangerous if she hadn't ripped it right out. Bolts and things fall off. Oh, Herb Demmett. He's the laundry repairman. He had an awful time with it. Sheets get caught in the folder. George says that's because they're using too much bleach in the washers, but it never used to happen. Now the girls hate to work on it. Essie even says there are still little bits of Adele Frawley caught in it, and it's sacrilege or something. That's so gross. Like it had a curse. It's been that way ever since Sherry cut her hand on one of the clamps. Sherry? Hutton asked. Sherry Owlette. Pretty little thing, just out of high school. Good worker, but clumsy sometimes. You know how young girls are. She cut her hand on something? Nothing strange about that. There are clamps to tighten down the feeder belt, see? Sherry was adjusting them so we could do a heavier load and probably dreaming about some boy. She cut her finger and bled all over everything. Miss Gillian looked puzzled. It wasn't until after the bolt started falling off. Adela was, about a week later, as if the machine had tasted blood and found it liked it. Don't women get funny ideas sometimes, Officer Hinton? Hunton, he said absently, looking over her head and into space.
Yeah, it just sort of raises the possibility that, like, wow, like, yeah, like um the machine could have woken up possessed, like the blood, and it and that's where the bolts, it also foreshadows the bolt that it's trying to escape before we're even thinking about it. It's the sort of thing where we look back and be like, oh shit, it was trying to break out even then.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
it was it had a verisimilitude. It had a verisimilitude, structurally, and The other thing I think we can learn as writers from it is King takes a long tradition of the supernatural detective, and the police procedural.
Hmm.
And this story is a mystery. So structurally, it's just the stakes are raised where it's the detective, be it the supernatural detective or the little detective, and he's just raising the stakes of the premise of what if an object is possessed? No, it can't be. And slowly but surely, he raises the stakes of that mystery in both the supernatural and also in the gore of it.
Yeah, the one thing I like is how at first he doesn't even consider anything like that. It's just a terrible happening, and they call it like an accidental death uh, with Miss Frawley.
Yeah.
Um, but things keep. First of all, he talks to his professor friend who's familiar with the occult, and he tells him the story about the fridge.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and how it just captured things and kept them in there, and one of them was a little boy, but he also found, like, birds and stuff trapped in that fridge.
yeah, yeah. He's just like really adept at being like, yeah, these things can happen, but there was that story about the fridge that ate birds,
Yeah,
or
exactly, yeah.
so yeah, it was just yeah, it was the combination of just like he's using all the different tools. That's why I call it like the Beatles, the White Album of it. He's using like the gore of like actually showing you someone get sucked in, and he's also raising the possibility of like, yeah, it's possible that like haunted objects could happen. And this predated Christine, which is one of
Mhm.
the all-time most notorious of like haunted object stories. So
Absolutely, yeah. But yeah, I like that how it's like different things are coming from different sides to say that yeah, this is like a possession. Like there's something supernatural
mhm.
happening here. Is you got the professor, not only that, but you have more circumstances happening with the machine. Like there's one part where one of the maintenance guys, I forget his name, but he gets his arm
Stanner.
stuck in it. Yeah,
Stanner, yeah. Yeah.
and that is a brutal scene, my god. Like, he gets his arm stuck in the machine, and it's just, like, it's starting to
Mhm.
break all his bones, and if his, friend doesn't get him out, uh, it's gonna take him in like it did Miss Frawley, right?
Yeah.
So, he has to take an axe and chop off his arm.
Yeah. And what's also in that scene is that's also a pivoting point in the story because King rules out that it's accidental at that point because
Yeah,
they talk about we shut it down, we pulled the fuses, we powered the machine down, but it still was doing it. So at that point it shifts
yes,
to not at that point the two characters are like, okay, it's not a question of is it possessed. This thing's now possessed. And at this point, the second half of the story is now about what are they going to do about it too.
yeah. So, they decide they're going to, do an exorcism on this machine. And that's interesting too because they try to figure out exactly what type of exorcism they're going to perform on this thing, and I kind of respected King for this because they're not just going in straight for the Christian stuff. I think it ends up being a Christian exorcism, but they discuss like is this like some other religion, like how do we pin this down?
I really like that discussion because the story does feel timeless, but it does date the story in a nice way because
Mhm.
it just came out in 72. But Jackson says he enlisted the help of a computer operator. He said, we ran it through the computer of all the different categories of what could it be? We
Yeah,
narrowed it down to this different, and they it's great because yeah, they don't not only do they not land on the straight up Regan Christian, they were just like, we don't know, we some guy at the university, a computer, which is much more mystical back then in 72, and they're like, yeah, it was it had an air of danger and mystery to it, of like people um they're acting nobly, but they're acting like sort of out of their league,
absolutely, yeah,
both in terms of the danger and what they're going to try to do.
yeah. So we'll get to the ending. I think maybe with our what we liked and what we didn't like. Um, and maybe even here with the pros. But I had a question for you, and I wanted to know how you thought Stephen King uses his prose to make the reader suspend their disbelief.
Yeah, I think by getting out of the way of it, I think there's a lot of he knows when to do atmospheric and when not to. So I feel like the down to earth, like making the prose very lucid and very clean and very clear and very direct. We are believing in this place. We believe in these characters. Um, we believe in it so that when the supernatural comes, we're able to. It's very just a short leap to suspend disbelief. Um, so yeah, and that's all. That's all on King and his prose. Like in the hands of a lesser writer, there were so many places where we would not suspend disbelief,
Uh,
and I think King makes that look easy. It's no small task.
yeah, I agree with that 100%. I also think the way he has people act uh, plays a role. I have one final excerpt I want to read, and it's from the very beginning of the story, but I think this helps. It helps the reader maintain a sense like this is a little realistic because of the way everyone reacts to Mrs. Folly's death. Um, Officer Hunton got to the laundry just as the ambulance was leaving, slowly, with no siren or flashing lights. Ominous. Inside, the office was stuffed with milling, silent people, some of them weeping. The plant itself was empty. The big automatic washers at the far end had not even been shut off or shut down. It made Hunton very wary. The crowd should have been at the scene of the accident, not in the office. It was the way things worked. The human animal had a built-in urge to view the remains. A very bad one, then. Hunton felt his stomach tighten, as it always did when the accidents were very bad. So I love that observation. When Hunton gets in there, he notices that the people who worked with Mrs. Farley are not anywhere near her. They're hiding in the office because what happened is so catastrophically awful that they can't bear to look at it.
He picks up on the realistic human reactions that we relate to consciously and subconsciously. So we're believing we're along for the ride.
Yeah, exactly. And he does that right at the beginning so that when the story, because and you disagree with me, and I'm totally fine with that. But the story is kind of realistic throughout the whole thing in Stephen King's prose, the way he presents it. Um, but I found that it kind of leans towards or drifts towards the absurd by the end. And I said that in my what we liked and what we didn't like.
Mm.
I said perhaps the ending wasn't the best part, but I still loved it, and I do love it. But it did it does kind of go into the absurd. But while you're reading it, you can totally believe what's happening.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think. Yeah, it's not necessarily a disagreement. I guess it's all in the subjective, and But for me, the ending is the best part.
It is. It's
and,
terrifying.
and for me, like on two different levels, as a kid, that's what stays with me. That's what stayed with me. I was like, oh, the Mangler ripping free of its moorings, and the manifestation of their fears that the Mangler would indeed become possessed and that the Mangler would indeed escape was all done in King's. King had very clean and crisp and efficient prose, and that's when he turns it on more about giving you the description of the Mangler both becoming more than metal, like becoming half metal, half demonic, and the images of it lurking right outside when it's like it's got free, it killed Jackson. Oh no, it's here. And he gives you that with the sparks flying and the mist and everything. And for me, that was the joy of reading as a kid when I read it. And now coming back to see how he did it as a grown up, for me, I didn't find it silly. I didn't find it, okay, it's absurd if I take it out of, if you say my real life, like, yeah, that happened. But I feel like he earned it. he earned the fact that this was a washing machine, a washing machine that got possessed and is now on a rampage. I didn't
Absolutely.
question, even as an adult, I didn't question it because I feel like he earned it with his discipline throughout there. And
Yeah.
that's what why I love the ending for two ways. One, it's the fulfillment of it structurally. Like he was working towards that ending even in the beginning with the little foreshadows of the bolts, the little foreshadows of everything.
You're right.
And whether we picked up on it consciously as I did as an adult or subconsciously as a kid, it really worked. And that's why I use the term masterful. It was smooth. It went right down the pipe. The other thing I love about the ending is whether King did it intentionally or not. I feel like it is the structure, it is the mold of a certain kind of classic horror story. The story is not about slaying the vampire. It's not about slaying the Mangler, even though they do attempt it. This is a story about their worst fear comes to pass.
Mhm.
End of story. It can't get out. It can't get out. It can't get out.
Yeah.
We must do an exorcism. We failed. Oh shit, we failed. It's out.
That's coming for you.
The end. Right.
Yeah.
The end. It's coming for you. And I don't have to tell you what's going to happen because I showed you the Mangler chew up bodies. But now this thing is a 30-foot by 6-foot metal demon hybrid walking around your neighborhood at night. It's more scary what the Mangler's gonna do to Hutton and what it's gonna do to that neighborhood than anything King can put on the page.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Um,
that's different, that's different than what King did in the rest of the story because he went there, but he was wise enough to have his instincts or just intellectually know, like, I went there, but I'm gonna let the readers shit their pants at the end of this story. And I
yeah.
feel like that structurally that pleases me because I feel like a lot of horror stories have that structure. Whether King picked up on it and it came before, or whether King people came and did it after King. What I call classic horror is just like a horror story ends on a revelation, and it's a revelation of oh shit.
Yeah. I have one final question about the ending of this story. It kind of came to me while we were talking about this story. Um, why do you suppose that the exorcism failed?
I feel like because they didn't really. It was presented as they didn't know what they were. They Jackson himself says that we're dealing with power that we don't know. They didn't even profess to know what they were doing, and even if they did, it was such a powerful thing. So a combination of their either incompetence or not being qualified. And there was a bit to be made about the Hand of Glory when they were analyzing it. They're like, well, as long as this wasn't made by a Hand of Glory, we should be able to handle it with just these components. But then there was a little part about saying like, wow, maybe they were simply wrong in their assessment, and this was more than meets the eye. And I think it's sort of like, yeah, I think King gave us like that being he wanted to present this is more as competent as Hutton and Jackson were. They're the kind of guys you see in the hardware store. They're the kind of guys you trust. They're the kind of
Hmm.
guys that get shit done. And I think he was trying to say like, yeah, as competent and as believable as these guys are, sometimes evil is just stronger, and sometimes even our champions, even our hometown guys that we trust, good dudes, are going to get chewed up and out of their league,
Yeah.
quite literally.
Awesome. All right, so I think um, that's pretty much. Do you before we get to our final thoughts, I do want to get into what we liked and what we didn't like. I already went into what I didn't like, and it's not that I was honestly I was hunting for something because this is my favorite one I think in the collection so far. And if I had to come up with anything, it was that the ending was a little absurd. But I still loved it. What I liked about this story is just how crazy it is. This is the first story, I think, in this collection that's not seemingly trying to make a serious point about anything.
Mm,
It's just written for fun, and it comes off as that. But you're still able to suspend your disbelief even when things go kind of batshit crazy, and you get that terrifying ending. That's what I absolutely love about this story. So, what did you like most about this story?
yeah. So yeah, if I other than like that amazing atmospheric ending and the amazing and the structure of it is, yeah, I like that that it's small, that it's small stakes, that it's the stakes of just like this one. It wasn't about a demonic invasion of Earth or anything. It was just about this one isolated incident of evil and strangeness. So I like that it was I like that it was easy. It was easy to believe, and it held me wrapped. And yeah, and it was real. It was real scary fun.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would nitpick about it at all?
I didn't find I think that's also what I love about it. I found the places that that I would think I would nitpick. Like I'm a hard sell for police procedurals. I'm a
Mhm.
hard sell for supernatural detectives, and this didn't ring my bells on that. So like
Yeah.
I'm just gonna have to say there were no presence of nitpicks, and yeah, all those things, the way the structure of it, I feel like someone could write the same story or a really similar structure story, and it could rub me the wrong way. I feel like it's a testament to King that he really overcame the areas that I would want to nitpick.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So, final thoughts. I think I pretty much said what my final thoughts were. This is my favorite so far of the collection, of my reread of it. I read this first time so long ago that I don't really remember the stories all that well, and I never really reread them.
Oh,
So, so this is my first reread through it, and honestly, like I only remembered like little bits here and there.
what
Like,
a treat you have! What a treat you have! When I'm feeling sad, I come back to Night Shift to
oh, nice.
just feel good again.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
So did we miss anything that you would like to talk about in regards to the Mangler?
Nah, no, no. We hit. What a joy it was to revisit it.
Yeah, it's awesome story. Did you ever watch the adaptation? And if
Oh,
so,
I thought we were gonna get out without talking about it. Yeah, I was gonna say my only nitpick is that the movie exists, man. I must have seen it back in the day. Maybe I didn't. I did rewatch it in preparation. And if we're gonna talk about the movie, I'll say the movie is like, well, it even used some of the dialogue straight up. It's an example of why suspension of disbelief doesn't work. By all reasons, that movie should have been. It had what's going on. It had Tobe Hooper. It had Robert Englund. It
mhm,
it had atmospheric. But for whatever reason, at least for this viewer and maybe a lot of other viewers, this suspension of disbelief never happens, and
yeah,
that's the actor's job. It's the whole team's job. It just shows the power of King's prose is able to make us suspend disbelief. And yeah, I feel like the two things that were wrong with that movie is for whatever reason it didn't make us suspend disbelief, and maybe leaned a little too hard into the work, the class aspect of it
yeah.
it didn't come alive.
I think they just, in my estimation, I don't think they took the story seriously enough. They just kind of went with their, even though they kept close, somewhat close to the foundation of the story. Like you said, they had like lines straight from the story into it. They didn't really focus on what the short story was actually about, and it wasn't about anything really. It was just about this possessed machine. And
The
I think
t-
if they just stuck with that and like maybe a little bit of a police procedural in the same sequence, maybe it would have been better. But instead, they wanted to isolate it and turn it into like you know jump scare type thing.
Exactly. There's a good movie waiting to happen, and maybe someone will make it, but it seems like the producers wanted to. It came out in 94, 95, and it seemed like they were trying to make a throwback of an 80s movie. They had Robert Englund in there, and he was absurd. He was just silly. He was the owner. And I understand why they wanted to make it that way, but the tone was all over the place, which did not, without the unity of tone, you didn't really suspend disbelief. And there's a lot of things where it didn't feel like an industrial laundry. The uniforms, the makeup, the acting wasn't so good. So we're so distracted, and once we're aware that we're in there, it seemed like they were trying to make a franchise. And in fact, they did make a franchise. I didn't see
Yeah,
the rest of them. There were two or three or maybe more, but
yeah,
because they spent their money on Robert Englund, who was probably fresh out of Nightmare on Elm Street, they were trying to make it more than it was. And it just felt sloppy and of low quality. I'm sorry to say, even though
Yeah.
Tobe Hooper is great and some of the individuals in it was great. Yeah, it's
It just like the exorcism at the end of the short story, it failed.
for me it did. I'm sorry to say.
No, I think it's universal. I don't think anyone really likes that with and Graveyard Shift too. That movie adaptation is not really
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of stinkers out there of his movies, but yep, that's par for the course.
mhm. Which is, that's just Hollywood though. Like,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
not King's fault. It's not King's fault at all. Yeah,
yeah.
it's definitely
I
yeah,
find that when King is more closely connected to it, it's usually better. Not always, but it's usually better if he's. But I think these ones were more just like he sold the rights and then
yeah.
somebody made it, and
Definitely, that's definitely what it was.
yeah. All right. Well, I had a blast talking about Stephen King with you again.
Damn, what a fun time! Thank
And
you.
thank you so much for coming on and getting to the meat and bones of a Stephen King short story. This one
Pun
was
intended.
yeah,
Pun intended.
and I'm looking forward to talking to you again for more short stories. And yeah,
Yeah,
so thanks, man.
I'd love to come back as the project rolls on. Anytime you want to talk about Stephen King, you know where to find me. Be great to talk about it again.
Awesome.